back.
Yeah, mine's off because I left it at home.
Yours is
green light.
okay. I guess. Can everybody hear me? All right, just
Right.
working.
All right,
Great.
Patrick, are we on live? Okay, well, in that case, good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. Virtual audience, thank you so much for joining our book launch for Brad's new book, Shadow of Doubt, which is, let's see, the first book published in 2002, The Lions of Lucerne. Did you imagine being here 22 years later?
No, and I never thought I was going to write a series character either. I loved Michael Crichton, and so I always thought each new book would have a new protagonist, and I could come up with somebody with a whole different backstory and things that were plaguing him or her, and everybody loved Scott Harvath, so he's been with me ever since. 2 decades.
He
2
has
decades,
been.
23 books.
Right,
Yeah.
and there's a rogue book in there that is not a Scott Harvath.
So I've done 24 overall. 1 year I did a second book called The Athena Project about an all-female Delta Force team. I see lots of heads nodding. People know that one. Yeah.
That comes up often, so I thought we'd just mention it. And the other question is, are you ever going to write a sequel?
Yeah, and I would like to. So it's just a matter of we've been working so hard to get the television show going, and that's been almost like a full-time job on top of writing. I don't want the quality to suffer. So I'd rather write 1 book a year. And doing 2 in 1 year was really hard. It was really hard. I mean, that was a lot of work to do 2 books in 1 year. So we'll see.
Well, you introduced television, so before we dive into anything else, why don't you update us?
Yeah, so I put out a big announcement at the beginning of the year that we are with Sony in Hollywood, and we've got a fabulous director. His name is Chad Stahelski. He did the John Wick movies. And he's overseas right now rebooting the film Highlander, which was with Christophe Lambert and Sean Connery. So he's redoing that one right now. When he comes back, then we'll start. We'll do the pitches for the Harvath TV series. So we'll be going to all of the different broadcasters, all the ones you could think where you might see something like this. We'll go and pitch them when Chad gets back from overseas. So we're very excited. We got a great writer. His name is Steve Lightfoot. And Steve wrote the Punisher series, if you saw that on Netflix. Also, which we love in our house, and Steve sent me the cookbook, which is it's beautifully photographed, but it's gross. So Steve was one of the big writers on Hannibal with Mads Mikkelsen and Lawrence Fishburne, which was the prequel to Silence of the Lambs, but on NBC. He did a great, great job with that. He's a fabulous writer, and he's got a show on Apple TV right now called Shantaram, which is based on a book, which is very, very intense. It's a great series. But he got this a few days ago, and I was just texting with him before I flew out here, and he's like, "Oh, I love it. I'm just ripping right through it." So it's very nice.
You would love it because there's so much action in this book. It would be eminently filmable.
Yeah, I've had a couple of people in my office say that maybe this is the one that they should start with in Hollywood because you could do a night manager type of limited series with it. But Hollywood wants to do it. They don't want the author to tell them how to do it. They'll decide the right way to do it. So you got to kind of respect that line.
Right. They'll call him an executive producer, which means basically he gets a chair with his name on it, and that's about it, right?
Yeah, I will write on it, though. That is the one thing. Yeah, because there's so many books. So that was one of the things that we negotiated, that I'm going to write on it. So because nobody knows the universe as well as I do. And so if they want to change, they have to change things. They can't go word for word for the books. But one of the things that everybody counts on is that you all are going to watch. And so I say this all the time. I don't work for Simon & Schuster. I work for each and every one of you. You are my employers. So I want you to be happy. And if things have to change, like let's say they decide to start with Lions of Lucerne, my first book. If they need to make changes to put it into the TV show, I want to be involved in that so that when we're ready to go, ready to launch this, I can come out to you, whether it's on Facebook or at my next book signing, and say, okay, we made some changes, but I got to make those changes. They told me what needed to be changed, and I said, okay, this is how, if I had to go back and change this in the book, this is how I would do it. Because I want to make sure that the level of quality you get in the TV show is the same that I put into the books. So, we'll see. We'll see what happens. And I'm still bucking for a part. I'm still trying to get a part in there, so we'll see what happens. We'll see.
put you in full makeup and all the rest. It'll be great. Did any of you notice the gorgeous makeup on the women gymnasts in the Olympics, if you've been watching it? Wow, it's a whole new frontier, seriously. So let me ask you this. If they were to start with the Lions of Lucerne, it's almost become historical. So would you update it, or would you try to keep it
I'm
in
using
2002?
I'm using that as an example. They definitely don't want to do it because it's almost like a period piece, because the cars have to be correct, the haircuts have to be correct, the costumes have to be correct. So that actually got floated at one point, and it was just a budget like nightmare. They'd rather go back. And so we talked about potentially doing seasons of episodes, but maybe doing a season, then a full-length feature, and then a season and a full-length feature. And you could do that potentially if you were at someplace like a Netflix or an Amazon or an Apple, because they work in both those formats. Mm-hmm. So we'll see what happens. But yeah, they talked about maybe starting a little bit later with Harvath and then potentially going back to the beginning with a younger actor to play Harvath as, excuse me, a spinoff kind of a thing. So we'll see what happens.
It's really exciting. A
Yeah.
whole Thor universe.
It has not been decided where we're going to start yet. So that's where we're waiting for the director to come back from filming Highlander so that we can we're all just sitting there waiting for him to come back. I want to see the movie. I'm really excited. I'm hoping I'm going to get an invitation to the premiere because I love the original. It was so good. And Stahelski's just a great director. So, excuse me. What was it that Jack Nicholson said? I talked to you a couple of weeks ago because I had a summer cold and I have this cough that has not let go. And I think in Chinatown there was that line, "Summer colds are the worst," and that got said 2 or 3 times in there. And
you're doing fine.
I'm trying. If I talk too much, I start coughing.
So going back to 2002 let's talk a little bit about who Harvath was when we first met him. And, by the time all these years later, he's evolved some. And are you aging him in Thor time or in real time?
No, in Thor time, because you're getting a new book every year.
Right.
What's that? Yeah, he'd be out. He'd be out already.
I know.
So so even though the books come out every year, that's not necessarily a year in Harvath's life. So this one, and I tell people that my books, for those who are watching as well, I tell people that my books are like the James Bond movies. If there's a new Bond in your multiplex, you can go see it. It doesn't matter if you've ever seen a James Bond movie before. You're going to be able to get caught up right away. You'll know who he is, what he represents. And so that's the same thing for me with Harvath, is I want people to be able to pick up any book and just completely lose themselves and have a great adventure. So essentially, this book starts right where Deadfall left off, where Harvath's communicating with Solvi in Oslo, and she can't get away. And he says, well, you know what? I'm going to come to you then. And that's where Deadfall had ended, and that's where this one picks up.
Okay, but going back to the beginning, what was Harvath? I mean, when he stepped onto the stage, what was his background?
So Harvath had been a Navy SEAL that had distinguished himself while protecting a president near the water, and got recruited to the Secret Service, particularly the presidential detail, to help bolster the counterterrorism expertise of the people at the White House and those protecting the president.
Okay. And eventually the Carlton Group came along?
Yes. Eventually, administrations changed. There was a different idea of how they should fight terrorism. They didn't like this idea of letting somebody like Harvath go after the bad guys with no oversight, no rules. And Harvath made his way into the private sector, and that's what the Carlton Group was.
Right. So I noticed when I went back to check on the order of books, because I have to tell you at my age, I just can't remember titles. I mean, it's just like a blank. So I realized that when I was looking at it, there were a lot of questions about whether Spy Master was the end or would there be a sequel to Spy Master. Oh. And that was, I'm serious, I looked it up on Google today just so I'd be sharp, right?
Sure.
And I was interested in that, so I went back to remind myself, of what happened in Spy Master, and then you sort of go in a new direction when we get to Norway and Solvi. But why did you decide? I mean, it can't be a secret. You've all read Spy Master. We're not going to do any spoilers here, are we? No.
Please do a spoiler, because I'm trying to remember how Spy Master ended. And that happens. You write so many books. I mean, there's only so much RAM There's only so much memory
You
storage.
were building towards the idea that Alzheimer's was going to take
Right,
the
right, right,
Carlton
right,
group,
right.
and
Yes, that's...
Lara, whom he had married,
She screams run, and he runs. That's what happens at the end of that.
okay,
Yeah,
right.
right. Yeah, so there was that whole thing about his mentor, Reed Carlton, having dementia,
Right.
and had groomed him to take over and all that kind of stuff, and he didn't want to take over. And that's still something he deals with now. So that's a big thing for him, that they want him out of the field.
Right.
So,
And he doesn't want to do that. He wants to
I was never
remain
going to
out
pull
there.
him out of the field.
So
put
when
him
we
behind
get
a
to
desk.
Near Dark, we kind of reboot his personal life, right? Because Solby comes along.
Yep.
I loved her. I call her the Norwegian ninja. She's just one of my favorite characters. And in this book, I'm happy to tell you that she really kicks butt. She really comes into her own. There's an incredible action scene with Solby. But you were putting him on a plane to fly back to Norway, and he's supposed to have a peaceful plane ride, kind of R&R.
And even that couldn't happen for the poor
You
guy.
tortured him. I mean, it was
Yeah.
terrible. So
Yeah.
tell us about that. No spoilers is the
Well,
opening
yeah,
chapter.
no spoilers. But I mean, Harvath gets on this plane. Harvath, you see his kind of internal justification for popping for a first-class ticket. He's just rescued this hostage in Ukraine. He's gotten the stuffing knocked out of him while he was there, and he's like, I'm going to get a first-class ticket. I'm just going to sit. I'm going to have a bourbon. It's not a long ride. Because originally in Deadfall, he was supposed to be meeting Solvay in Poland, in Warsaw, because it's halfway between where he was in Romania at the end of the previous book and Oslo. And so he decides, okay, I'm going to go see her. I'm going to have a bourbon. And the flight attendant says, is there anything else I can get you? He's like, yeah, I need 3 Ziploc bags filled with ice. And he's putting them on different places. And and then there's a little bit of a disturbance on the airplane. Yeah, which he tries to ignore. Not my problem, not my problem, not my problem, until it is his problem. Yeah.
Well, actually, I'm sure everybody on the airplane was glad that he was on the airplane. But, right. And then when he gets off the airplane, the second disruption occurs.
Yeah, so essentially with this book, what I have put out there about it is, so there's a defector. We saw that at the end of Deadfall. There's this guy, Leonid Grechko, who's had it with the Russians and everything, and he decides to bolt across the border with Norway. He goes up to the north of Russia, jumps across, and Solvay and her team are waiting for him in the back of a grocery store, a real-life grocery store that's there. And so what happens to Harvath is he's on his way to see Solvay, and he gets off the plane, and the station chief for the CIA in Oslo is waiting for him at the airport. And he had said when he got on the airplane, he said, I don't even care if the world's burning down. I'm not doing anything else. I'm taking 7 days. And so there's somebody from the CIA there that very much out of The Godfather makes him an offer that he can't refuse. Or at least they think he can't refuse. That was the idea. The CIA knew he'd say no to it, so they built in a backup plan to pressure him in, which is interesting for Harvath because it represents in the first book I wrote with him, Lions of Lucerne, he's on the run from his own government. And after that, he's taken every single assignment he's ever been asked to take. This is the first time he's ever said no to one, and they decide they're not going to take no for an answer. And they do something, they put some terrible pressure on him. And so that was kind of a fun thing to do. And then obviously there's some other developments in the book that add to his motivation to want to pursue things even faster and stronger.
Very true. I have to say I heard from him because by the time we get through the third thing that happens, which we won't talk about, I'm not sure that he shouldn't have just, checked into the ER. And I mean, really, it was punishing. So you might be interested to, when you read about Grechko and the path that he crossed and all, I don't know if everybody realizes that Norway actually goes across the top of Sweden and towards Finland. And so there's an interesting route. I looked it all up because you used a specific crossing place. Mm-hmm. So I thought, I know that Brad's research is always meticulous and all, but I thought, what the hell, I'll just look it all up. So I did, and you can trace the route. And it really is interesting, the fact that he can cross from Russia.
In the real world, it's one of the only border crossings into the West that has still been open to the Russians. Right. And so the Russians often come into Norway to shop for diapers, chocolate, alcohol, because it's cheaper, believe it or not, in Norway for them than it is in Russia, and better quality.
That's really hard to believe because I've spent a lot of time in Norway, and I mean,
expensive.
even having lunch can put you in debt.
Yeah.
So it's very expensive, right? But anyway, part of the reason that I'm sorry, excuse me, I mentioned that is that Finland has now established a pretty hard line with Russia, but if you
Sweden too.
Yep, but if you can skirt it.
Yeah. So it's all what grist for the mill. It's may you live
really
in
is.
interesting times. I used to think that was a lovely saying from the Chinese. I didn't know it was a curse. That interesting is not necessarily good. The stock market doesn't like interesting. It likes boring. It likes the same stuff happening all the time. But yeah.
No, it absolutely does. For any of you who might be interested, do you ever watch MHZ, Michael Harvey Zebra TV? It's all foreign. It's all international stuff with subtitles or sometimes in English. And there are two, out of the blue, there are two really brilliant Finnish series. I know this because Mark Grady asked me if I knew any way he could look at Finland because he can't get there while he's writing his new book. So I sent him these, two, and I recommend you watch them because one of them really is interesting it's a police show about how they go back and forth. This is before the Ukraine. They go back and forth from, say, crossing into Russia and then coming back into Finland. And it's open traffic practically. There's like a little checkpoint, and now, it can't be like that.
Yeah, and now the Finns are building, they're really working on a very serious border wall now, and the Norwegians are spending money. Everything's changed.
It really
But
is.
there's something interesting in this. I put out a chapter, and I don't know how many people read the chapter that we put online or listened to the excerpt and everything. So there's a particular weapon, let's say, that gets used in the very opening of the book. And what's cool is, and I won't spoil it for you because I won't even tell you the full story, but I had been out to a dinner in D.C. with the director of the International Spy Museum. Has anybody ever been to that museum in D.C.? Okay, a couple people. That's great. It's a fantastic museum. And I like to ask weird questions. And I asked the director of the museum, what's like the oddest thing that you have here? And he told me, and I don't want to spoil it, but when you read chapter 1, this item that's used in chapter 1, this is because the actual weapon is in their possession at the International Spy Museum. It's very, very cool. So when you read chapter 1, you'll be like, oh my gosh, was it that? The actual one that gets referenced in this item was used to kill Trotsky when Stalin sent assassins to Mexico City to kill him. This murder weapon they used is it's actually at the International Spy Museum. And when the director told me that years ago, I said, someday I'm going to put that into a book. And so that's what I did with this one, and that's what that came from. Yeah.
So
Very neat.
you've had Russia in your sights for a long time. Rising Tiger, I thought, was fascinating because I hadn't really thought about, the Chinese-Indian interface, moving away briefly from Russia up there in the. Why did you call it Rising Tiger? I mean, I know why, but just explain it.
I mean, the tiger is associated with India. India is a growing, rising power. We're the oldest democracy. They're the largest. So it played on several.
Well, but the snow
different-
tigers, wasn't that part of it?
I think it was. I think they were called the snow leopards.
Oh, were they?
I think they were called the snow leopards. The actual. This is again like I had to be refreshed on how does Spy Master end. My wife has this theory of memory that your mind is like an iceberg and memories are penguins, and there's only room for so many penguins on the iceberg at any one time. And to make a new memory, you've got to bump one penguin's got to bump another one off. Sometimes they're swimming around and you can get back on. Sometimes they're gone. So, but I think it's snow. Actually think it's snow leopards. I think
Okay.
that's what the name of these guys are.
Anyway, it was
Yeah.
fabulous theater for. I'm going to demonstrate there's another way to look at memory, which is, I think, as you get older, just think about a computer model. Many of you who have been here often have heard me say this. What happens is the retrieval system is so overloaded, it just slows down. If you'd really forgotten it, you wouldn't be able to recall it. But there are many times when I'm talking and I will grope for a name and I can't remember it. And then 3 or 4 minutes later, whir, out it comes.
I just read Arthur Brooks' new book, Strength to Strength. And it is such a good, it's nonfiction. And Arthur Brooks had run a think tank in D.C. Called AEI, but now he's kind of reinvented himself in the second half of his life as a happiness expert. And this book, Strength to Strength, is fantastic. I wish somebody put it in my hands in my 40s, as I was going through my 40s into my 50s. And one of the things he talks about is what happens in the mind. And so you're using the example of a retrieval system. He said it's like you've got this librarian that has to go back in the stacks to get the name. But he stops, talks to some colleagues, gets coffee along the way.
Right.
By the time he comes back, that person whose name you needed is gone. You know, you saw him on a different aisle in the grocery store, but the same thing.
It is the same. Well, I'm sorry. I live with a computer geek, so I tend to think of it in that direction. And, you know, I find it comforting in a way to know that it's there. I just can't access it right away.
It happens to everybody.
Which is wonderful. So, I mean, I've always loved the locations of your books. I had a great time when you were doing the sequel to Near Dark. You went up to Svalbard, right?
No, I couldn't. That's when
No,
COVID happened. So I was supposed to go, and they closed Svalbard very quickly with COVID because they don't have the medical facilities on the archipelago to take care of people and to airlift people who were seriously ill. So I did not get to go. But when I have something happen where if I can't go somewhere, I want to talk to somebody who's been there in kind of an operational sense. So I want somebody who's law enforcement, intelligence, military, even down to the diplomatic corps with some of the training they get, somebody whose job it was to pay attention to details. So I'd had somebody that spent a lot of time on Svalbard, shared with me a lot of personal videos and photographs and walked me through everything. So I did not get to go for that, but I did I did do Oslo and I did Paris for this book. And it's very funny. I was out with a friend of mine who was not currently, but he was a former hostage czar. I had dedicated Backlash to him. I was out with him a weekend ago, and he had introduced me to some friends at dinner. And invariably, you know, oh, you're a writer. What have you written? You know, you tell them your name, and they don't know. They haven't read you, and they said, okay, well, we'll read one of your books. What should it be? And before I could answer, this guy jumps in and says, Backlash, because it's got a hostage czar character in it, which was based on him, and the book was dedicated to him. So, yeah, it was very funny. But so I gave him a copy of this book when I saw him last weekend, and he started reading it that night. And the restaurant from chapter 1, which is a real restaurant, he said, oh, I've been there. And I said, come on, that is like this small restaurant in the Marais. He said, yeah. He said, but the restaurant is called Robert and Louise. My name's Robert, and my wife's middle name is Louise. So we had to go. And when we go back to Paris, we always go to that same little restaurant. He said, I can't believe you put it in the book. So it was very cool.
That is very cool. I love that. I didn't phrase my question very well. I knew you hadn't been to Svalbard, and you only went there, you know, you went there in the book. But I had been to Svalbard, and we had a talk. When you go there, if you're a tourist, you are not allowed to walk outside a very tiny part of the city limit, because of the polar bears. So you have to go with I'm serious.
Somebody with a rifle.
You have to walk around if you travel there with, Longyearbyen is, I think, the major city. It's Svalbard itself is I always say this wrong, archipelago. Do I have that right?
Archipelago, yeah.
Yep. As you go up Norway and you're going to curve towards Russia, there's a whole thing there. And it's really beautiful, still a haven for polar bears. But it was perfect for your story because, am I going to embarrass you by asking you what that one was about?
What? Black ice?
Yep.
Oh, so the whole idea of black ice was that with the summers getting hotter and longer up in the Arctic Circle, the ice is melting and staying melted for longer periods of time. Mm-hmm. And so the Chinese have had their eyes on being able to sail over Russia and come down to deliver things in Europe because it cuts a crazy amount of time off of having to go from Shanghai all the way around up to Rotterdam. So in the book, in exchange for getting free passage up there, the Chinese were going to share a piece of military technology with the Russians. And
I
that's
thought
what
it was a
about.
Truly terrifying plot. And in fact, might
Did
very
too.
well come true. I would really... I wonder sometimes if thriller writers, you in particular, can sort of like have some sort of future vision or something where you guys tap into things that oftentimes turn out to come true.
It's Sukalos,
Oh, thank you.
aliens.
Yeah, you're right. That's it. They're talking to him up there in zone whatever, right?
Yeah.
Area whatever, right up here in Nevada. That's where it is, right?
But that is
52.
part of the reason why I got tapped. Brad Meltzer got tapped. A handful of us after 9/11 to help the government think up plots.
Right.
So they after the Department of Homeland Security was stood up, they created something called the Analytic Red Cell Program, and the idea was to help the U.S. government stay 3 to 4 steps ahead of the bad guys. And Michael Bay, the director of the Benghazi movie and the Transformer movies, Michael was in there as well. So it was very, very interesting. And I thought, as the son of a United States Marine, to be asked to serve my country not by picking up a rifle, but by, using my creative juices. Yeah, it was very cool. It was
Well,
very
I mean,
cool.
it really makes sense if thriller writers are basically gaming things, that could happen in different locations. Then, Patrick just showed me a really terrible video from the Olympic Games about the pole vaulter, which you haven't seen it. I mean, and as Patrick said, and I agree, you could never make that up, nor could you put it in a book, actually. But on the other hand, you can think up plots that, might terrifyingly come true.
Yeah, and in fact, something that is true that I put in the book is there is this, the French right now for the Olympics are using this surveillance system that is enhanced by AI. And so it's all this facial recognition stuff, and they had to rewrite their own laws temporarily to allow for this security software to be used in Paris. And it was very interesting because they did a test of it back in March when there was a Depeche Mode concert in Paris, and they had signs up saying you're being filmed if you come in here and all this kind of stuff. But they were tracking people and where do they go, where do they come from, and everything. So that was I needed that in the book. And I didn't know, excuse me, if the French were going to be using this software. And so I Googled it and I found, oh my gosh, yeah, the French are going to be using it. So I really got lucky because I was going to have to really use some artistic license and say the French were quietly using it for the Olympics. But they really did pick it up. I don't think they're going to be able to get rid of it. Once you open that Pandora's box, once you get that taste of power, it's like Harry Potter having to hand his wand back.
Yeah, but to be fair, I'm sure that security is the worst nightmare for them while this whole thing is going on. I personally thought that the death toll would come from the people in the river. Anybody who actually swam in the Seine was the most likely to be, seriously ill.
They've downed a ton of drones. The last thing I saw was something like 63 drones or something like that. There are these big rifles. They look like something out of Star Wars that just scramble the brains of the drones and just drop them. It's very cool.
Maybe they'll loan them to Zelensky and their crew in the Ukraine.
Yeah, you could hit the Russians with them. Those maybe to work on the Russians use those Iranian drones. That's a big thing, and that's actually something I talk about in the book as well. Is that's a big push with the Brits having left. Having done Brexit, the French are really trying to instill themselves as the military kind of 800-pound gorilla in Europe. And they've quietly been putting a lot of weapon systems into Ukraine because they want the Ukrainians to train on them, to love them, and to keep buying them from France. And then they have a lot of advisors over there because they see this whole drone thing as the future of warfare. So the French have tons of people over there learning from the Ukrainians on how to do this. It's actually very interesting.
Have you ever been stalked by a drone?
No.
I have, believe it or not. We were in Stockholm, and we were walking along towards the old town, the Gamla stan, and all of a sudden there was this weird noise, and we looked up, and there was this big black drone flying overhead. It was really creepy. It turned out to be some guy over on an island who was just, practicing or something, but it was a really awful feeling.
Wild. Yeah, I've got to, there's all these rules, at least in Tennessee, we're not allowed to shoot them out of the sky and stuff. Because we're not supposed to discharge firearms close to other dwellings.
Well,
and
that'll
all this
be a
kind of
problem
stuff.
for Amazon, won't it? I'll tell you one really creative use of drones, which I truly loved. We had our roof inspected because if you have a tile roof,
smart.
and the roof company arrived with drones and flew them over the roof. And I thought that was brilliant and worked far better than having some guy go up there.
Yeah, safer too.
Yep, all the way around. So talk a little bit about Gretschko. I mean, what is his motivation for wanting to defect?
So this is interesting. So I went to school in Paris my junior year of college, and I didn't know. My kids joke, and this isn't their joke, they got it off the internet, that once you become a middle-aged dad, you have two choices. You can either devote all your time to smoking meats or World War II history. You have to pick one or the other. Either you're going to be down at your local bookstore buying lots of books, or you've got a little green egg in the backyard. And I've been fascinated with a lot of stuff about World War II, about NATO and post-war Europe, and I didn't know that NATO was originally headquartered in Paris. That a couple blocks from the Eiffel Tower is this building that was built in the shape of the letter A to represent the alliance, but that the French were a little big for their britches. They wanted to be on the same footing in the alliance as the Brits and the Americans. And I also didn't know that because of this tension in NATO, and that the French kind of played the hokey pokey. They'd leave one foot in, take one foot out, and that we ended up pulling all of our air bases from France and pulling the headquarters and moving them to Brussels, which is really interesting. And so the more I got into this, I found out about I had never seen, I thought I'd seen all Hitchcock's movies. But there was something called the Sapphire Affair, where in real life, a Russian defector came to the United States with a bombshell. And his bombshell was the French are shot through with Soviet spies. This is during JFK's administration. And like bad, like they were everywhere. And in fact, the Soviets were bragging that any piece of highly sensitive intelligence that went through NATO, they could have their hands on in 24 hours. And they were stealing so much from NATO that they weren't even using Cyrillic to mark the pages. They were just leaving them marked the way they were at NATO. They just duplicated the NATO filing system. And Kennedy had a real problem because he didn't know who he could trust on the other side. So he handwrote a letter, gave it to an aide, said, go over to the French president, stand there in front of him, hand it to him, let him read it, take the letter back. And he did, and the French ended up coming over and interviewing the defector. The French president sent a couple of people he trusted to interview him and really find out if this was true. And so I was fascinated by this. I thought, wow, what would it be like if something like this happened today? And that's part of what I wanted to weave into the book. So with Grechko, who's a high-ranking Russian intelligence officer that I introduced in Deadfall, he's so disillusioned with what's happening in Russia. How many people in here, just out of curiosity, read Deadfall? Okay, thank you very much. Appreciate that. A lot of people. So there's one scene in Deadfall, and again, if you haven't read Deadfall, it's okay. You don't need to have read it for this to appreciate and enjoy Shadow of Doubt. But there's one scene where Grechko bumps into a woman that he had allowed himself to fall deeply in love with. And she's in Moscow for one night. She's a kept woman from an oligarch. And he's like, okay, I'll meet you for dinner. We'll go back to that place we used to go to together and everything. And he gets a call. He's got to come into the Kremlin. The Russian president wants him to come in so they could talk. And in the Russian president's office is this knucklehead that is this woman, the oligarch, that's keeping this woman. And they're sitting there drinking vodka, and they keep him there for hours and hours, and he can't go meet this woman, unfortunately. And the Russian president's friend is giving all these dumb ideas of what he thinks ought to be done and all this kind of stuff. And that was it for him. He had decided, I don't want any more part of this. If that's really how we're going to figure out our foreign policy as drunk friends of the president, I'm gone. I'm out. And so he ends up defecting to Norway at the end of Deadfall, and then that becomes a huge jumping off point because now the Norwegians have him, the CIA wants him. They want to know what he knows, and they don't trust the Norwegians enough to... It's funny, I had dinner with the Norwegian ambassador to the U.S. In the spring, and she'd asked me what the book was about. And I told her that part. She said, oh, that's terrible. Of course we'd share intelligence. You're some of our greatest... You're one of our greatest partners. You're our ally. She did not like that I was putting in the book that the CIA was afraid the Norwegians wouldn't be completely wonderful and share everything with them. And you'll see that there's somebody when you read Shadow of Doubt, you'll see that there's somebody says there's a whole bunch of reasons we should not be doing what we're doing behind the backs of the Norwegians, not the least of which is that their ambassador is so beloved in D.C., and that's the actual ambassador. So I put that in there for her. So when I got I like highlighted that passage for her and put a little Post-it note in there, and I just mailed the book out to her a week ago. So, yeah.
So are they going to translate this book into Norwegian?
We'll see. My agent's already talking to the Norwegian publisher, so we'll see. That's a much smaller market, so it's very tough to get books into the Norwegian market because it's much, much, much smaller than here. Yeah.
Fair enough. So when you're writing about Russia, you obviously, well, you could just call him Putin, but who are the Russian people that you make up?
Yeah, so just like I could call a terrorist Bin Laden, but I know Bin Laden is going to, I never put Bin Laden in one of my books because I knew eventually he'd be killed or captured. So I don't want to, I want these are fictional characters. So, but yeah, there's a lot of what happens in the real world. There's a compound, this massive compound on the Black Sea that actually exists in real life. So there's a lot of real life things. I just don't call the guy Putin in the books for that reason, because it's just, this is fiction. So.
Well, I hope it's fiction. Yeah, there we are. Right. Anything else you'd like to say about the book, or we could take questions?
No, I think let's take a couple of questions. And
All
then
right.
I've got a couple of questions. I've got
All
3
right.
challenge coins, so I'm going to ask
Right.
some
Patrick,
trivia questions.
do you have a microphone? Hang on just a minute, because it's really hard for the at-home audience to hear the questions. It'd probably be a really good idea if you could do that.
Is this thing working? Yes?
Yep. There's a gentleman in the back if you want to. Sorry.
So this is a question for your memory. I was just curious, since I have my Lions of Lucerne, when was the last time you looked at the picture on the back of that the book?
It's a great, yeah.
It looks like your high school, senior pick.
Ago. Yeah, I mean that picture is probably 2001. That picture. That's 23 years old. Yeah, a lot of trips to Switzerland. They put the key in the back and just tighten everything up.
You have terrific imagination, man.
Oh, thank
I
you.
have to tell you, your character development's amazing. Everything from a dwarf who's a hacking expert to Reed Carlton. And when I read so much about Carlton, it reminded me, was that patterned after Dewey Claridge?
Yes, that was patterned after Dewey. Very good. Wow.
Yeah, because I read a lot. When you're 88, you have plenty of time to read. But at any rate, you might want to tell the group a little bit about Dewey Claridge, because he's a character right out of a Brad Thor novel.
He is. So I knew Dewey. So Dewey's an interesting guy. I think when Dewey finished up his time at the CIA, he was chief of Latin American operations. Dewey was very much a no bureaucracy kind of guy, from New England. So the old man Carlton in the books was completely was an homage to Dewey, who I knew. Fascinating guy. Had helped establish the Counterterrorism Center at CIA. Just very big, larger than life, very bold, and very much of the Wild Bill Donovan OSS precursor to the CIA. In this idea that if you fall forward in service of the mission, which I think as the CIA got bigger. There's oversight. There's all these kinds of things. So I think, it was. It's really interesting who you talk to and who worked with Dewey at the CIA, who was kind of his generation of the CIA versus how younger up and coming people looked at kind of these. But he was a wild character, just very patriotic and very much willing to try unusual. What am I looking for here? Solutions to problems. So just a terrific guy. We miss him all the time.
Do you miss Reed Carlton? Do you miss writing about him?
I do a little bit. I do. I think it was appropriate to. It kind of. So when Dewey passed, I kind of knew I was going to do that with Reed Carlton, because I just felt like I wanted to close out that character, just kind of because the real world person it was based on was gone. So I do, but I also think it helps progress Harvath's story along, because again, that was supposed to be Harvath's job, was to take over at some point, and he doesn't want to. And I know guys like this that are still in the field that don't want to come out, that really don't think anybody can do it as well as they can, that just have convinced themselves that if they're not out there doing this, that it's just not going to get done. So it's an interesting thing to put Harvath through.
Do you have an actor in mind for playing Harvath in a TV show?
I don't know, because I don't know where they're going to start yet. So until I know kind of where on the spectrum, so I don't. It's really, really funny. I've got actors that I like that I think are terrific, and then there's so many young up-and-comers that potentially could fit the bill. So we're going to have to see. Do they start with Rising Tiger, which got a lot of attention at Sony? They thought, wow, that'd be really cool. We could go to India, shoot it there. We haven't seen a spy series like that. It'd be beautiful. Obviously, there's lots of technical expertise because there's so much movie and TV stuff that gets done in India, so you can find crews over there. So I'm not sure yet. It's a great question. I'm very excited. That'll be a really neat place to get to because that'll mean we've got 1 foot in the end zone when we cast. That'll be awesome. Yes, sir.
You always seem to almost be ahead of what's going on around the world when you pick the plot or the key in each book. Deadfall, the Ukraine, obviously the oligarchy in Russia. How do you, with all the things that are going on in the world, I mean, even over the last 20 years, it seems like there's a million different things going on. How do you kind of pinpoint what you're going to use as that trigger for the next story?
Thank you. It's a great question. I don't know. I just kind of got a gut feeling there's something that really interests me, and I think it could make for a great plot. And so that tends to be what it is. And I get, Dan Brown had given me a wonderful blurb at one point saying Brad Thor's books are as current as tomorrow's headlines. Just a wonderful, wonderful blurb from Dan. So I just happen to look at things and I think, okay, this is a big deal. You'll see in the acknowledgments of Shadow of Doubt, there's a gentleman, a geopolitical strategist who I give credit to, where I say, okay, all the stuff that was happening in these chapters in the CIA, that is this guy's stuff. And I'm trying to just ham-handedly, I'm not trying to ham-handedly, it's probably ham-handedly, the guy's so smart. So sometimes I find experts and people, and I'm listening to what's being talked about. I look at what seminars are going on around the world. What are some of these experts concerned about? And then I always say I buy a lot of pitchers of beer and steak dinners, and I ask people, what's keeping you awake at night? What are you worried about? And so you'll find that if you're talking to people who are currently active in intelligence, the diplomatic community, law enforcement, you'll pick up a lot. But it is, I can't, it's just, I get a gut feeling for it, right? It's like you go to Vegas and you're going to put it on black, you're going to put it on red, and I'm just my gut.
So here's kind of a writerly question, but so many thriller writers write series because you've got your guy.
Yeah.
And therefore you can really focus on what you're talking about. If you were not writing a series and every thriller was going to be original, that would be a lot more difficult, wouldn't it? Because you'd be creating a universe and a character as well as finding your plot inspirations.
Yeah, I mean, that's probably true. I probably wouldn't be doing as much of the faction, as I call it, where you don't know where the facts end and the fiction begins. So I think that's just the sweet spot with Harvath being, representative of the U.S. government, whether that's he's getting his paycheck directly from the federal government or it's being washed through the Carlton Group. I think it would be more difficult if I had gone the Michael Crichton route, but I probably wouldn't be doing a lot of I wouldn't be using a big geopolitical thing as a set piece. It'd be like Congo, where those ruins in Congo and all that kind of stuff. I always was a huge Michael Crichton fan, so.
So have you ever, not that you need to, but have you ever thought of collaborating with another author for just a scene? And I remember I emailed you and Mark Greeny one time, or I commented on a Facebook post, and I said, if Scott Harvath and Court Gentry were to meet up some cafe and ran into each other in Vienna or wherever, I would lose my ever-loving mind and I would probably flip out in my living room. But have you ever thought of maybe just... because you have such a great following, and so does he, people would lose their minds, I'm sure.
I did it with Steve Barry and James Rollins years ago. We each put a character in each one of our books. So in one book I did Cotton Malone, and then the next book I did Jim's character from his Sigma Force novels. And so that was fun. And then people would reach out to me on Facebook and say, I saw Scott Harvath, and I went, that son of a bitch, Steve Barry. I'm going to sue him. What did he do? What did he say about Scott Harvath? They're like, you didn't know? I'm like, no, I didn't know. I'm like, so Barry cheats at cards and he's a plagiarist? This is terrible. Terrible. And then I eventually have to tell people, no. We all decided. I think we were at Steve's wedding, and we all decided to do that. We were either at a Thriller Fest or at Steve's wedding. But yeah, I think it's a neat thing. I think that is much more doable than, like, I have people say, well, you guys should write a book together, and I'm like, no, you can't. Yeah, but a scene would be fun. I just have to meet up because Greenie's in Memphis, I'm in Nashville. We just pick like a little honky tonk, some roadside bar halfway between in Tennessee.
Get you a beer and a steak.
Okay, there you go. Me and Mark.
I just want to know, is the troll based on somebody that you came across or that you know?
That's a great question. Yes and no. So, two things led to the troll. One is I developed the troll when my kids were really little and they were watching Dora the Explorer. Because there is a grumpy old troll that lives under the bridge. Yeah. So that was one thing. And then where we lived, there was a little person who was professional and had a small London Fog style trench coat, was always well dressed, would go to the office. We'd see this person getting on the bus, and my kids would ask questions because we were walking to the school bus and that kind of a thing. And one of my children said, what do you think that person does for a living? And I'm like, I don't know. What do you think that person does? So we had this interesting conversation walking to the school bus that day. And I thought, okay, wow, if you were not big, I mean, this person's not going to bounce at a nightclub and stuff like that. But what if the strength came from what was in their mind? And what if they were really strong and could bend people to their will? What if you could have the exact opposite of just being huge and so strong? And that's what led to the creation of that character. So it was kind of a hybrid of the Dora and then the person in the neighborhood. Right,
I love
no.
it. Dora the Explorer. Dad,
Yeah.
Patrick, are there questions from the audience? All right, Patrick's going to check. Anybody else? Yes, sir? No, we can hear you probably. Speak up.
One of the things I've noticed in several of your fellow writers is when they talk about Russia in particular, they talk about the corruption
Mm-hmm.
and the influence of the oligarchs, and there seems to be a lot of cracks in terms of whether or not they can sustain a future structure based on what they have done in the past and what they're doing now. Do you have any insight on that? How you look at it?
So the questions about the oligarchs and is this sustainable with all the cracks in the system? I mean, they're all beholden to Putin, so they need Putin to stay in power. I really thought I was fascinated when the head of the Wagner Group marched to within like 200 kilometers of Moscow. I was like, whoa. And then he had sudden Russian death syndrome. His plane fell out of the sky. You fall out windows, fall off rooftops, your plane falls out of the sky. It's gravity is the number one killer of people in Russia. They think it's the alcoholism. It's actually gravity. Kills more people in Russia than anything else. So, yeah, you look at, they replaced the defense minister. He had, I heard upwards of a third of the budget was being siphoned off into his own, kind of hidden away into his own pockets and things like that. So it's bad. One of the things I talk about in the book is that Russia, this is the last generation of fighting age men that Russia is going to be able to effectively field. So when the Soviet Union collapsed, the birth rate collapsed more than 50%, and the death rate doubled. And the education system collapsed in Russia. So you've got people right now, the last people with any good education in Russia are 62, 63 years old. This is from the old Soviet system. These are the people who are maintaining the nuclear weapons, the trains, the airplanes, all this kind of stuff. They are running out of young people in this country. And so we talk a lot about, is Putin crazy? Why is he doing what he's doing? And so you'll see this, there's a whole geopolitical thing that I did in the book that I had not heard of before and I was fascinated by, which is Russia's basically very large and very flat. It's very difficult to defend militarily. And there's 9 gateways that armies have come in to invade Russia in the past. And at the end of World War II, the Soviets had those all sewn up. They had all their doors locked. And so they didn't have to worry about capturing these doors. They just had to grab people out of the Caucasus or whatever, force them into the military, and make them sit on those doors and hold those doors. They've lost all but 2 of those doors. So this is Putin's last chance to be able to lock all the doors so Russia can't be invaded. So there is a lot of, is he a megalomaniac? Is he trying to knit back together the Soviet Union? Yes, but if you look at why, if you look at how indefensible his position is, if he doesn't get all of these doors around Russia locked down, it's fascinating. So they have a geographic problem that they are trying to solve with demography, which is not cooperating with them. They need people. They're losing people. This was always going to be a very difficult time for the rest of the world, particularly the immediate neighbors for Russia, because this is their last chance to make this push. If Putin doesn't push now, they're not going to have the military to be able to do it. So that I find fascinating. So that's why the oligarchs aren't overthrowing him. Part of the reason, I mean, they're very beholden to him and things like that. But they all know this is it. They don't have an army, or not what they used to after this generation is done.
So here's a thought that I have had, and I might be wrong, but talking about, the geography of Russia, I think it's important to remember that the winds blow east. And he keeps talking about nuclear threat and all, but is China really going to be happy if he decides to detonate, nuclear? I mean, the wind blows east. It does not blow west.
Yeah, so it'll be interesting. These
China and North
nu-
Korea are
yeah.
going to be right, right there.
I don't know how far with these lower yield battlefield nuclear weapons, these tactical nuclear weapons. I don't know how long that stuff stays aloft and how far it blows. But yeah, I wouldn't want to be in the path of that. I mean, up to North Korea and China, it's going to be a lot of his own people that are in the path of that.
Exactly.
So that's a problem too.
So I don't know. I've often wondered. We don't even know if their nuclear arms are, still usable, so to speak. I can't think of the right word.
Well,
Who wants to gamble on finding out?
That is the problem.
Nonetheless,
that's the problem. Did
Patrick,
Patrick have anybody on the internet with questions, Patrick, or should I go and do my trivia questions?
Almost there. Let's see. There are a few questions.
Okay, we got to get these. We got to take care of
to scroll through Facebook
our
and keep
at
up
home
with it.
audience. Hi, everybody at home. Thank you for watching.
Okay, Jonathan asks, besides From Strength to Strength, can you recommend any other good nonfiction books?
Wow, besides From Strength to Strength. All right, penguins, get back on the iceberg. So I'll tell you this. I'm a huge fan of Ryan Holiday. So
Stoic.
The Obstacle is the Way, and he's got a whole series of books. So Ryan is a big proponent of Stoicism. So, and I started reading Ryan during COVID when the lockdowns were happening and everything. I was kind of looking for something to kind of get my head in the right place. And so I think all Ryan Holiday's books on Stoicism are fantastic. So in addition to Arthur Brooks' book, Strength to Strength, I would recommend starting with The Obstacle is the Way and then reading the other ones.
Are you a fan of the Marcus Aurelius Meditations,
Yes.
of course, and
Yes.
Seneca?
Absolutely.
Letters from a Stoic, yep.
Yep.
Okay, Mark asks, are you ever coming to Memphis?
Is that Mark Green? That sounds like Mark Greeny, who lives in Memphis.
It's not fun, oddly enough.
No, I'll definitely come to Memphis. I'll do something with Mark there because I owe Mark and his lovely wife and their kids a visit. So yeah, at some point I'll do something in Memphis. Absolutely. Come see me in Nashville at BoucherCon at the end of the month. That's an easy drive from Memphis.
And then maybe final question. Was Steve's wedding like Thriller Fest?
It was, yeah. There were a lot of
Probably
people who were overserved, and yeah, no, it was a lot of fun. There were a handful of authors there and stuff, and it was really lovely because the part of Georgia Steve lives in is just beautiful. It was like a postcard. It was a lot of fun.
So there are some Easter eggs that get introduced into thrillers if you read a lot of them. And one thing Steve did, which I thought was really fun, Jim Rollins, who will be here tomorrow night to launch his new thriller, is Sigmafor's thriller. His real name is Tchaikovsky. And so Steve wrote a book, do you remember this? Set in Poland for Cotton Malone and whatever. And he made the president of Poland, Mr. Tchaikovsky. So if you were
Steve is a lousy card player and he cheats like hell. So this is how he gets out of his debts with like Jim. It's like he'll put Jim's name in his books and hope Jim shaves a little off. So you can ask.
I mean, but I think it's fun for readers to get these little Easter eggy things.
It is fun to know the behind the scenes.
I mean, but you'd have to sort of, it's extra fun. So questions for you.
So I have 3. I do challenge coins every year with every book. I bring 3 to each of the signings that I do. And so I'm going to ask trivia questions. Put your hand up if you know the answer. Don't shout it out. And so, and if you get the answer right, then you get the coin. So the first question is, how did Reed Carlton get his nickname? What is the nickname and how did he get it? Yes. Yes. Do you know how he got the nickname?
Something when he was in either in boot camp or he was the canned peaches. I just remember there was canned peaches.
What did he do with the canned peaches? Do you remember?
I don't.
That's good enough for me because yeah, he actually crushes some guys. He slams them. That was from Black Ice actually, where the guy was telling Harvath the story about how Peaches got his nickname. So that's great. You're very welcome. Thank you. All right. So I used to do these easy questions like what are the names of Nicholas's dogs and things like that. That was too easy. Too easy. So Harvath gets married and his wife, unfortunately, the Russians get to her. What was his wife's first name? Yes. Very good. There you go. All right, so should I make this an easy one or a hard one? Like really hard, huh? Really hard. Okay, so a previous president, out of gratitude to Harvath, deeds him a piece of property for $1 a year. What's the property called? Very good. Wow. Wow. I thought I'd come up with a hard question.
Well,
All right.
you did. All right, you get to ask one more because we're going to give away a Vince Flynn Capture or Kill by Don Bentley, a Mitch Rapp novel. And we didn't give out numbers tonight, so
Should I ask a Mitch Rapp question or
think
should
you
I ask a
should.
Scott Harvath Mitch Rapp question?
I would.
Okay. All right. So let me think. Mitch Rapp. Ooh. And I don't want to take something that was in the movie because that's cheating. Okay. So something about rap. Okay. What was get ready with your hands. What was the motivating factor for Rapp to join the CIA? Yes, sir. That's the movie. That's not the book. Yes, sir. Right, yes. So that gentleman got it. That's what the Lockerbie bombing.
Oh.
Yes.
All right.
You were close, though. It's hard to kind of remember what's the movie, what's the book, right? Yeah.
That's going to be a problem for your fans.
Yeah, well, hopefully we won't have to change it that much. I'm hoping it isn't a problem. I'm hoping that we keep as true as we can. But again, they know better than I do. They've been making TV.
They do.
Yeah.
So let's close with your suggesting that there will be another Scott Harvath book. And
there's definitely more Scott Harvath books.
definitely more Harvath
Yes,
book.
yes.
So we aren't going to have questions about will there be a sequel
No,
to Shadow
there's
of Doubt.
no. Harvath's
Okay.
coming back next summer. No
Okay,
problem.
good. I
Yeah.
like you to all go away happy at the thought that there will be another Harvath book.
Thank you.
Well
All
done.
right.
So, as I mentioned to you, there is not a signing line, but Brad has signed your books. And double check because we have extras, and if somehow we skip that
Yeah,
one, we can trade it in. So just make sure your book is signed. There are paperbacks and last year's book that are signed up in the front. And if you want to take a photo, get out your phone, and let's start with the front row. And you can stand up and photograph Brad and then exit, and then we'll just move back row to row. And if you don't want to do that, thank you very much for coming.
Yeah,
and you can
thank
just
you
get
very
up
much.
and leave.
Thank
Good
you.
night, everybody.
Uh-oh. No. So I'm sorry. I've since I'm on the road, I'm trying to be very careful about staying healthy and everything. So,
This is just a photo of Brad standing there, but unfortunately you can't be in it. Right. I'm sorry, I wasn't clear enough. So just step into the center and take your photo, and thank you very much for coming.
thank you very much. Thank you for coming.